Hello everyone and welcome to your second video in Twinmotion part 2. This time we are looking at the real exciting stuff, which is lighting. Lighting has the most impact in everything we do inside the renderer. It really does change the way it looks and feels. No matter what materials you use, how you set up your assets, what you do with your landscaping, the lighting really does change the look and feel, which is why we dedicate so much time in this video just to looking at lighting. Once we've finished our lighting both in the exterior and in the interior, we'll then look at how to set up our camera so that we can maximize the expression of our USP, our unique selling proposition of the particular house that we're looking at in this case study. Then at the end, of course, we will look at how to export all of the beautiful work you've done inside Twinmotion into high resolution client perspectives. All right, let's get stuck in. All right, so the first thing we need to know about lighting is that it's all going to change depending on what your basic settings are. So for example, our time of day and our time of year are going to have the most amount of impact in our lighting. So let's have a look at what that looks like. First thing in the morning, just around sunrise, we're going to have a very, very light quality. Then as we come around and the sun comes up, we're going to have quite a neutral light quality as it comes through, comes around, and then we have our bright sun. And then as we get towards our sunset, we'll notice that we start to move towards what is called the golden hour. And if you look at the quality of the light here, this is what we would call the golden hour just before sunset. And then here we are almost at dusk. And we can see it's getting really, very orangey gold now. And then just after sunset, we start to head towards a kind of more purple, cool tone color as well. So it's really going to depend what time of day you have for your exterior shots as to what quality of light you're going to have. Now, of course, the time of day is also going to impact where the sun is sitting in the sky. So first thing in the morning, it's going to be over in the east. And then we are going to be towards the north at noon. And then we're going to head towards the west in the afternoon and evening. So it really depends on the location of your project. And you can offset that. So if it doesn't quite come in where it should, you can come down to the location here and you can just kind of play around with this until you find where north is. Typically what I do to make it easy for myself is I will put the time on 12 o'clock. And then I will put the sun where it should be for north. So for example, north is over here for me. So this tree should be horizontally casting shadow for it to be in the correct location. So something like that is going to be the north point for this particular house. The other thing I can do for the location is actually set the location right here in Twinmotion. So if I open up the details tab and scroll down a bit, I can see that currently I am in Europe, which is not going to help because we are going to be in the northern hemisphere, which means the sun is going to be going towards the south at noon rather than the north, which does present an issue. So it's looking for latitude and longitude here. Let's just delete all of that out. And I'm going to type in PERTH for Perth, Western Australia, and I'll click on that one and it's moved it for us. So now our north point should be in the correct location. We can close that tab down. You might have to reset this again if you've already done that. So I've got 12 o'clock noon and I can see that's shifted a lot for me. So what I will do is I'll move this one around until it is in the right location. So that tree should be going horizontally out there. That looks good. And then I might want to change what time of year it is. Now, don't get confused and try and change the time of year in the weather. It might think that you're changing from summer to winter, but actually it's down in the location settings again, go into details, and it is the month. So most of the time I start with summer for my exterior shots, get that nice bright sun, and I can work backwards from there. So you can change this around if you want to, and you notice that depending on the time of the year, that's going to change where the sun is in the sky as well. If we then go back up to the global lighting, and if you lose this, by the way, say for example, you clicked on one of the trees, you need to get back into that. It's just the ambience in the scene tab. It's always going to be stuck up the top for you. So if we go back up to global lighting, let's get rid of that. Click on details, and we know that we've got a lot more tools underneath here. So we can play with the sun's intensity. So we can play with the brightness of the sun and really turn that up. We can play with the sun's reflectivity. We can play with the sun size itself. We can also play with the ambience. And the ambience is going to change the overall level. So this one probably has the most impact for us. Now, as a renderer, its job is to make sure that we can see everything when we're taking a render. But that's not super realistic to how the world actually works. And typically, if we were in bright sun like this, that would mean that the interior would be a lot darker, particularly we don't have any lights set up inside there. So actually, in reality, the ambient should be something more like this. We should have darker spots and brighter spots relative to that very, very powerful sun, particularly if I'm in Western Australia and I've got a very bright sun in the middle of summer. I shouldn't have that much ambience. So you might want to experiment with bringing the ambience down the first time you set up your lighting so that it looks more realistic. We can also take over the exposure. So we'll notice if I go forwards and I go into the main space inside here, that it's going to adjust the exposure automatically as I go inside and outside. Now, inside should be a lot darker than it is outside, but Twinmotion is automatically adjusting that for me as I go in and out. If I change auto exposure to off, and then I set the exposure myself just up here, we'll notice that it's more realistic. So at the moment, this is bright full sun on the outside, but it is darker on our interior, which is more realistic. So again, once we're setting up our interior lighting and we can turn some lights on in the main spaces that will be activated, that will make a lot more sense to your renders. So that's another thing you can do as well to start to take some control, is to turn the exposure off, the auto exposure, and start to set the exposure yourself so that it looks more realistic. Once we've played around with a few of these settings, I'll typically once again toggle the R button for ray trace, or in this case path tracing, just to see what our lighting is going to look like for a final finished render. I'm only on the low settings for this particular path trace. When I take my final renders later, I'm going to be setting that to high, but at least low is going to give us an indication of where it's going. We've got quite good lighting and crispness on all of this landscape around here. Reflections are looking good. We could probably stand to go a little bit brighter with our exposure. But otherwise, I think it's looking pretty accurate. It should be nice and dark in there. Some of the materials on the assets are a little bit funky because I didn't take the time to change the materials from the assets themselves when they came straight from the library. So I would play around with that a little bit more. But if we discount that iMac and the stuff sitting on the table there that I haven't edited yet, I would say that the general level inside here is looking pretty accurate with the ray trace turned on. Let's turn that back off. What if we bump up the exposure to 4 and then hit R for ray trace again? Yeah, that might now be a little bit overexposed, but I think it's heading in the right direction of where we want to go. Yeah, definitely too overexposed now, particularly in the brick walls. We're starting to blur it all together a little bit, but we are moving in the direction we want to. And so there's going to be a little bit of trial and error for you as you continue to figure this out. So that we can keep working, I'm going to put this back onto auto exposure for now. So I turn that back on and I'll turn this back down to 0. And that's going to give us a nice base level. It's going to keep adjusting for us as I go in and out of these spaces as well. And you can do the same. If you feel like auto exposure is doing everything you need to do, and when you put on manual exposure, it's not making too much of a difference for you, or it's not improving the scene for you, you can feel free to turn auto exposure back on if you would like to. Most important, really, is to play around with the sun intensity and the ambience, because these are the things that are going to have more impact on the realism. Another part of our exterior lighting is the actual light itself. So at the moment we've got this default flat Twinmotion sky and there's nothing really going on here. And I've even still got that Twinmotion environment, which is going to be an issue for us in just a second. But we can actually put a much more realistic sky and sun up there. So this is our base level and we can push beyond that. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see HDRI environment. If we click on enable, it's going to give us two options. We've got the actual sky dome, which is going to allow us to edit the sky, and we can see we've got a more realistic sky here with clouds in there. And as we change the time of year and the season that we're in, that is going to impact the sky, but already much more realistic in what the sky is looking like. Maybe not so crash hot with what the lighting is doing, but a lot of that is going to be because of the reflection of this sandscape that we've got around there. So I can go ahead and delete that by clicking on this one and delete, and this one and delete. And we'll notice that it does soften a little bit because we don't have so much reflection. And inside the sky dome, we'll notice if we click down, we do also have some settings in here we can change as well. So if I click on go to library underneath Noon Clear, I can actually go ahead and change the type of sky I use, much the same as downloading any other assets. As long as we're signed in, we can click on the download arrow and that will download for us. And then what we're looking at when we're looking through these is actually the spheres themselves. So if you keep an eye on them, you notice that some of them are brighter, some of them are a little bit cloudy, some of them are quite dark. So if I get this darker one and put it over to here, drag and drop, we'll notice in a second that it does change the sky, but it also changes the lighting condition too, darker in that particular composition. Now I could go back up to the top and experiment with the exposure so that I could balance this out, because I like the sky, I like what it's doing, it just needs to be exposed a bit more. That's one option for us, or we can go back into our skies and experiment with some other ones. At the moment, we are inside the noon clear skies, but we've also got low sun skies, so that might be afternoon or evening. We've also got mid-morning, afternoon, evening, so kind of in between the middle of the day and the start of the day. And then you'll notice that you've also got clear, cloudy, and overcast. So there are quite a lot of skies to choose from when using a sky dome. Another option for you if you don't want to use the sky dome and you want to do two things at once by creating a background environment is to change, instead of sky dome, to backdrop HDRI. So what the backdrop HDRI does is it takes a 360 panorama image and puts it around your particular building. So if I turn this off for a second, it's going to look a bit ugly, but we can see we've got this environment which is now running all the way around our shot. So if I go up into the settings and I rotate this around, we'll see that this is actually moving around our house. So what will happen for most of you, depending on where your model is brought into Twinmotion, is you might actually need to change the size of it. So I've put this out to a maximum. I believe from memory it starts something like this. So it's assuming that you're going to have an object in the center and that everything will fit inside of there. For me, I've actually needed to push that all the way out to its maximum so that when I'm looking at my shot here, that stuff looks like it's over in the background, which is what I want. And that's going to work best for me and my image. Rotating around will also change the position of the sun. So we'll notice that the shadows are changing depending where the sun is in that particular image. So we can see the sun is up over there now. And if I move it away, it is going to move the bright part of the sky, but it's also going to impact all of the shadows in your shot as well, which is what we want. We wouldn't want to have shadows running this way, but the bright sun is sitting up over there the opposite direction. That doesn't really make any sense. So that is working effectively. What you may need to do, which is what we can see here, is change the offset of the height. So at the moment, by default, it's sitting at 0, but so is our house. So I will typically move this down to -1, something like that. And then that way, when I'm looking at my shot, my house is sitting slightly above that, which is fine because this house is actually elevated anyway. So I could probably get away with doing something like, I don't know, -5 if I'm sitting 5 meters up, and then the tree canopy sits a little higher, and that kind of smoothly sits in with the bushes that I've got as part of this shot here anyway. So I'm pretty happy with that. And that is with our normal lighting. And then R for ray trace is going to work on the proper shadow and reflection. And that's looking pretty good. I think it's kind of capturing nicely the trees here on the olive leaves. I think the materials are looking pretty good. Reflections are looking good. It is a gloomy shot, but that is because it is a gloomy image that has been used. So approaching storm is an approaching storm, right? So if we click on that and then go to the library, that's going to give a certain impression or experience. Likewise, if I put a sunset image in there, let's just turn off the ray tracing for a second. If I put a sunset image in here, it's going to get darker. And there we go. We've got that sunset inside there, right? So if I hit R for ray trace, we've got that sunset in the background, and we notice that the lighting changes to more of a sunset feel. Within the ambient settings, if I wanted to make this feel more like a golden hour so that it matched what was going on in there, rather than changing the time of day, because that's not going to have much impact to our HDRI, what I would do instead is go back up to our lighting settings, into our details, and I'm just going to play with the white balance. So if I bring this down, we'll notice that that makes it a lot cooler. If I put it up, we'll notice that it's going to make it a lot warmer. So I can make it feel like the golden hour without having to make much change at all. All I've done is just played around with the white balance. The other settings in here aren't going to have too much difference with the R for ray tracing turned on. So R for ray tracing is going to have most of the control over the image. It's not going to impact too many things if you change in there. And then because we're using an HDRI in combination with the R for ray tracing, those two things are going to have the most influence over your image. So just keep that in mind as well. If you're starting to change around some of these settings in here and they're not having any impact anymore, it's probably because you've changed over to an HDRI and because you're using an R for ray trace at the same time. So if I turn that off, that is looking pretty awful at the moment, but don't worry, we're going to be using ray trace when we do that anyway, so it's not going to make too much of a difference to me. The point being that depending on what environment we use for our HDRI backdrop, you are going to very much change the lighting condition there. So scan through these. You can also go to the website Polyhaven to download. There's even more of these inside there. A lot of these come from Polyhaven too, but there are plenty of options available for you. So if you go through there, have a look and find one that works for you in terms of not only the time of day, but the type of light, where the sun's position is, if it's a bright white light, if it's a sunny light, if it's a warm light, all of those kinds of things you can look out for. And once again, what the spheres are doing at the bottom of the shot is going to be a good indicator of how the light is actually working for you and what it's going to come out looking like in the final version. Another reason I really like the HDRI backdrop is because it can help to fill in a lot of the stuff that is missing out of your model. Often we're not going to have enough time to model absolutely everything, particularly not surrounding context and environment. So having an HDRI can help us fill in some of the stuff that's not there. Now, this is an example of where I'd probably have to intervene. So over on the left-hand side, this is fine, where it's kind of filling in, and we've got this wall here, and that could just be stuff that is at a park across the road. Here, this is not quite as good an option because it does look like we're going off the edge of the universe there and falling into a sea of water. So what I would typically do at this point is, knowing that this is going to be an issue, is I would just make another low wall quickly here in SketchUp. Then I would put some more hedging over the top because I can see that's already working effectively for me. And then I would just play with the height offset. So at the moment I can see that 1.4 is probably about right. I can pull it down a little lower again, and that might be about right. And then once this is coming over the edge here, that's really covering up a lot of the horizon line for me. And if I do R on the keyboard for ray trace, we'll see that that's getting us a nice distinction between the two. And so this really does feel like maybe that's a park across the street. It's got a good blur to it once ray trace is turned on, so that looks like it's further away, and again makes it more believable. So for me, I would use this as kind of a rough guide. I'd say, okay, this side of the wall is telling me this is working successfully. So what I'm going to do is, rather than building the whole thing out and building the rest of the house and building everything, I'm going to do a 1-minute job in SketchUp to just build another part of the wall, put some more ferns plants over the top, and then that'll be enough to get us across the line there. And this is already doing wonders for our lighting here as well, by the way. I'm really happy with the way this is coming out. We've got a nice overcast day. Maybe it's about to rain, something like that, but it's looking quite good. Materials looking good, reflections are looking good. Really happy with how that is coming out from this particular HDRI backdrop. that is our exterior lighting. Plenty of things for you to think about there. Everything really is covered in the ambience tab for you. So that's where you should be experimenting and playing around. Ultimately, it's going to depend A, where you put your camera, what you're actually looking at, and B, what type of experience you want. So whether you want it to be in full sun in the middle of summer, or you want it to be in winter when it's about to rain, just like we looked at before, or you want it to be noon or morning or evening or nighttime, whatever you want to portray in your image is going to affect the lighting for the exterior. So plenty of things to think about there, but all of the control for you is inside that ambience tab. The next thing we need to think about is our interior. So if we hit on R on our keyboard for ray trace, we'll notice that the exterior lighting is pretty good for what I'm going for in that wintry kind of look. But our interior spaces are now looking pretty flat and dark inside there. So we're going to have to add some lighting. We are getting some lighting throwing into the space, which is great, but I want some actual lights inside this space. So let's go ahead and have a look at how to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to amplify this window that we've got here by adding in another rectangular window. So if we go over to our libraries, go into lights, and then we're going to hit an area light, this one in the corner here. And what I'll do is I'll just put it here on this wall for now so we can see it. We'll go over to our scene tab, and I'm just going to, considering we're doing lighting now, I'm just going to change this over to light as our filters so I can see. Let's hit 90 to rotate. And that's going the wrong way. So one more time, we're going to change that by 180 to throw back towards us. We can see the direction up here on the ceiling. Then I'm just going to pull this roughly into the center, and we're going to start making this a little bit smaller. So our width, let's pull that down to, let's try 2 meters and see how that's doing. That's pretty close actually. We just need to pull it into the middle, I reckon. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Then our length, so definitely not 5 meters. So let's go, let's try 3 meters and see how that goes. Okay. Let's try 2 meters. We'll pull that up. Great. Okay, so I can see it needs to come down a little bit lower just behind where that person is seated. 2.2. Cool. We go down a little bit. All right, what I'm trying to do is I'm creating a box of light which is coming into this space here, and I'm just going to put that inside. There we go. And so what will happen is we can artificially boost the amount of light that's coming into that space. So that's my area light. If I hit on R for ray trace now, we'll notice that we've got a lot more light coming into there. The color of the light is wrong because that is more of an artificial light color than it is a natural light color. However, the amount of light coming into the space is better. So let's click on that one there. I'm going to change the color temperature to match the sun. So we change this up to 6500 Kelvin and see if that gets better for us. Let's hit R again. No, still too bright. So let's boost this up to, we'll try 8000 because we have got a particularly overcast white light outside. So we're going to need to match that and maybe go a little lighter than we would usually as well. R for ray trace. Okay, let's let that load a little bit longer because some of the brownness is going to be coming off of the material as well. And to be honest, I'm already liking that better. Now again, we're on the low settings at the moment, so all of these reflections and stuff are going to look a lot better when we do the final render. But if I turn this off by comparison and we let that load, we'll see that we're not really getting enough light coming through that giant window behind them. Yeah, not at all. Look how little light is coming through that space. Considering this big overcast sky that we got there, this is a lot more realistic. Okay, so that's the first thing we've done, is we've just amplified our windows by putting a area light inside there, which is good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put some actual lights inside the space. So first thing, let's turn off Alpha Ray Trace, and I'm going to go along this back edge here. All right, so in the kitchen here, we might have some track lighting. So we've got a couple of options. Typically I find that the area light is the easiest way to do this. So I'm going to go central and to where it hits the top, and I'll push that up just a little bit. And then I'm going to come side on so I can see what I'm doing. Let's change this width again. So let's try 3 meters. How are we going for width there? This case, it's the length that we need to get. So 2.4, and we can come back up from there. So that's not wide enough. So 3 is not quite wide enough. 3.2. There'll be a bit of finessing like this. That looks pretty good. We're getting these like little shadowy bits in the corner, maybe where the track lighting doesn't quite go to the end because it needs its framing. 3.3, I reckon that's pretty spot on. And then the other one, let's try 0.2. So that's 200 mil. And then I just want to position this first before we make it even smaller again so that I can see what I'm doing. That's going to come to the back down here. Great. And then let's hit R for ray trace and see how it's looking. Cool. Pretty good. And we're getting the shine coming off of the back there, almost like we've got a hidden light detail coming around the corner there. We're getting now too much light coming from that area light behind us. So we can go ahead and turn that one down. Hit R for ray trace just to turn that off so we can control what we're doing. R for ray trace. Cool, and I'm just going to turn this one down a little bit. So it's at 300 lumens at the moment. I'm going to bump that down to 100. Then what I'm going to do is put another one of these lights inside here. So I'm going to click on the existing one, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and then drag it over to make a copy. And we'll just copy that one. I don't want to instance it. And I'm going to make this one smaller. So let's go with, this time we're going to go maybe 1800. Might be too wide still. Let's try 1.5. Yep, perfect. And then if we hit R for ray trace, it should already be all set up for us. Cool. Okay. Pretty happy with how that's coming in. It might be too bright though. Yeah, I think it is. So we can just go and select both of them. And let's bring down the intensity. Put them to 100. R for ray trace. Yep. Again, we're kind of just getting it roughly to where we want it for now, because later on we're going to turn this up to full when we do our proper renders. We won't actually turn it onto full while we're on screen because the graphics card might not be happy with that, but we'll set it to full when we go to render it out later. Okay, if you ever notice these little bits in the middle of your scene, that's just your assets. If you type in G on your keyboard, that will allow you to toggle them on and off. So G for gizmo, if you remember that, is how you can turn them on and off so you can and can't see them. Makes life much easier. Okay, let's have a look at how our light is looking now inside this space. Getting quite a lot of light from that window, a lot of light from the window behind us, which makes sense. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some light fittings inside here to put into the space. We can see I've already added a couple. So let's go ahead and add another set now. What I'll do is I'll chuck some light over the top of this table as a feature. So I might do a cluster of 3 really long hanging lights over that table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Sketchup Warehouse to download some light fittings. Let's have a look. So if you go to, and I'll just go back out of this so you can see what I've done. Sketchup Warehouse, top one here. Click on in, and then you'll find that companies spend lots and lots of money putting their products in here so that architects specify it. So you can find all sorts of stuff as free models ready to go so that you specify their products. So if I type in pendant lamp, there'll be heaps of different lamps by companies, and I want this one here, pendant lease, and we just hit download. It'll ask what version you want it. I've got SketchUp 2023, that's fine. And then we're going to go ahead and import that directly into Twinmotion. Now, you could bring this into SketchUp first and then just update your model. But personally, I think I want to have it directly inside Twinmotion so that I could change all of the materials a lot more easily and have a little bit more control. So I just hit plus. This time we're on geometry instead of direct link. Hit open. That's the SketchUp file I just downloaded. It's going to import it for us. Yep, don't worry about that. You see material, that's fine. We can use imported if you want to. And that will update our scene for us. So we're going to change back to all. If I go down to the bottom of the scene, it will be in there. And there we go. That's our SketchUp file. So if we want to find that, I can click on this and hit F for find, and that will automatically take me to it. So that's our object. I am going to just grab that and put it roughly where the house is. Hit F for find again so that it jumps me in. Move that over. F for find to jump me back in, and then that's kind of roughly got me to where I need to be so that I can start to look around and move this up. So let's put that up here and have a look at the light, and I'm just going to slowly push this up until I see I lose it in the ceiling. There we go. So just down from there, and that's a good position from that direction. This one needs to come over a little bit, so I'll just push that over till we're a bit more central. How are we looking? Yeah, cool. And I want 3 of these, so I'm just going to hold down shift and pull that into the center of the table. That looks about the center. I want another one, so we do 2, click copy, click OK. And there we go. So we've got our pendant lights inside here, and they're just sitting over the top of the table. Great. So now what we need to do is change our material so that it looks realistic in the scene. So I'm going to go over to my mega scans to get some proper metal, bare, and let's go with steel, and then T for eyedropper because I want them to be all the same, so I'm not just going to drag and drop multiple times. I open up my materials section, there we go, and I'll just drag that on the same one, and that way if I edit that one, it's going to edit all of them, which I do want to do. I want to have a black metal which has still got some reflection to it. Nice, cool, that's looking pretty good. Then what I want to do is I'm going to make a new material to be the light itself coming out of there. So let's go to new standard material, and I'm just going to rename this to be light emit. I'm going to put that inside the lens of these ones here. You might need to get a little closer to be able to get into there. Down underneath, and now what I'm going to do is come down into my lens material, and I'm going to turn the emissive all the way up. So now it looks like it's producing light. So rather than me putting a light in there but the light still looks like it's in the off position, I've got the materials set up so that it looks like the light is on. What I would typically do is also change this to more of an orangey warm light, because the light itself is going to be quite warm. So it would be weird if we look at the lights and they have a white light emitting out of them, but they're producing orange. So before I do anything else, I usually just change this to over to a orangey kind of color, and then maybe the material itself, I might add a little tint of orange too as well. Great, and that's going to cover our bases. We can see already it's got a warmth to it. Then the next thing I can do is back over to my library tab. I'm actually ready to start adding some lights in there. And we've got a huge amount of lights for free for us already put in, which is great. I'm just going to use the first one here, the IES one. I'll put that inside that one there. And then we've got some things that we need to play around with. So first thing is I'm just going to make sure that it's at the correct height. I'm going to move that up to there. Then I'm going to change the cone angle. So I'm going to bring that down. We can see that that is a very, very steep angle, not quite right. So we'll click on that one again and bring that out. Then my intensity I need to bring down a lot. So I'm going to put that to 25 because this is going to be quite subtle. I'm going to bring in the attenuation a little bit. So maybe it's just going to hit the table, but not go quite so heavily through the table. The attenuation basically is how far it can go. So if I pull it up to here, the light's not actually going to hit that bread. if I put this down to the middle of the table, only a little bit of the light is going to go through the table to the floor. If I keep going, it's going to push all the way through to the floor, which is a little bit weird because you wouldn't have that much light making it all the way through. So you kind of got to finesse this and just play with it a little bit so that it makes sense with what you're actually doing. So a little bit of light coming through, I think, works the most. Once you've got one of them set up, we're just going to copy these over. So hold down Shift, copy it over, and 2 copies, click OK, there we go, cool. So once again, let's have a look and see what that looks like in reality. So with this lighting, looks a bit funky. However, half a ray trace, because it's going to be closer to what we're doing. Too bright. So we're too bright at the moment. It's too much of a spotlight, and it's not quite doing what we want it to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all 3 of them. I'm going to play with the cone angle and just allow them to overlap a little bit more so that it covers more of the table. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this down to 10 lumens for the intensity. Half a ray trace, that's looking better already. Again, once we get into proper settings, that will work better for us. What I'm looking for as well is this exterior shot that I'm taking. I want to make sure the light makes sense in the background of the shot inside there. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's definitely better now with the lights going on in the background. If anything, I reckon we can get away with boosting those track lights so we put inside the house. So if I filter this to just light, I can grab the area lights, so it's the second 2 that we had, and I'm going to turn them up to 300. And here we go, let's ray trace again. Yeah, better. It's just a little subtle light coming down there, but I think it makes more sense. And that is the process. We would continue to go around and do the same thing. So we would first start by putting the light fitting in. We would get the light fitting working in terms of its materials to make sure it's actually emitting some light. So we've got some light emitting out of there, and then we would set up the lights inside of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around now and just put some more lights inside this space so that we can see what the illuminated room is going to look like with full lighting. All right, so I've finished adding all of my lights in the interior, and I've just come back out here to test and make sure there's a good balance between the two. So if we were in daylight, but it's an overcast sky, we would probably have the lights turned on in the interior. So let's go have a look at what we've got. So in terms of the lighting that I've got inside my interior, we'll see that I've got my auto exposure still turned on at the moment, but you get the idea. You can turn that off if you need to. I have got my rectangular area light inside here, and I've changed the color of that so that it looks the same bright white color as the sky outside. That's throwing lots of nice light into this space. Then I've just gone around and I've added the lights that would be inside this specific room. So we've got these lights that we put together before over the table. I've got a little reading nook light. I've got my study nook, my kitchen benchtop concealed light, lights in the ceiling, and then some additional spotlights over the top of the sink here. And then you would fine tune and finesse this and get it looking perfect. Now for me, you can see I didn't spend much time on this. The lights aren't even equally distanced inside this space, and the outcome of that is I get this kind of a light coming over and up the wall. Doesn't look particularly good. So look out for stuff like that when you're putting your own lighting together. Obviously you would take more time to put this in. You get your lights evenly distributed through the space, but what you're looking for is a good balance of lighting for different experiences. So for example, if I was sitting here at this kitchen table having my breakfast, that would be a different lighting experience for the interior than if I was standing out here looking into the space. So for me, I like the balance of what's going on here, particularly if I hit R on my keyboard. That's looking pretty accurate to what I would want. Balances nicely with what's going on in my exterior lighting. However, if I go into this space, I reckon this is probably slightly exposed. Let's hit R for ray trace. Yeah, we're getting a bit of burnout around the edges, and we're still getting a bit of darkness over there. So probably what I would do is 3 more ceiling lights running down here, maybe even more, to get all the way down the edge of the corridor. And then I'd turn all of the lights down a bit for this space. So more lights, but lower intensity for the actual individual lights themselves, so that it feels a bit more balanced. You're going to have to play around with this depending on which shot you're taking. So you'd have your lights set up for your exterior shot, and that's how the lights are. You'd have another setup for your interior shot. Say my interior was something like this over here. I'd have another lighting setup, so I'd change all of my lighting for that. And then if I've got another exterior like this one out here that I really like, then I would have different lighting set up again. So it's going to be dependent on where your camera is positioned, what you're trying to show in the shot, and what your USP is as to how you're going to set up your artificial lighting. So the sky, of course, is going to change the look and feel of the image, and that's the most important one. So whether you're using a sky dome or an HDRI environment, or you're using the plain Twinmotion sky, that's going to change a lot. The time of day is going to change a lot. The weather, the climate, all of those things. So that needs to be done first. That's going to have the most impact. Once you've then decided on that and you've put your camera in the right position, time of day set up, everything's ready, that is when you would then check against your interior lighting. So you do the exterior first, and then based on what the exterior is doing, you'd balance your interior lighting against that, which is what I did here. I went back to my main shot, something like this, a little higher, a little further forward, like this. Set up my R for ray tracing to get the proper lighting from my HDRI environment, and then I balance what was going on here. So a quick example of that, my HDRI environment, if I change the intensity of my HDRI, it is going to change what the lights look like. So for an extreme example, if I turn this all the way down, so I've got very, very low intensity on my HDRI, the interior lighting is going to look much, much brighter, right? So they do impact each other. Depending on what you do with your sky dome, what you do with your backdrop HDRI is going to very much impact what the interior lighting looks like. So you'll need to track and measure and balance with a bit of trial and error to make sure your lighting is balanced against what you're looking for. By the same token, if you want it to look like a nighttime shot, you can either put your sky into night, as in make the time of day at nighttime, or you can play around with other backdrop HDRIs at different times of day and then turn the intensity down. And then by default, your brightness on the interior of the space would be brighter than the exterior, which is exactly what we see at nighttime. So it works both ways. You need to balance your lighting against the exterior in full sun, but also if you wanted to do a nighttime shot, you would need to balance your lighting against the darkness of the exterior as well. So up to you, up to what you're showing, and dependent on your USP, your unique selling proposition, what makes your property particularly special. On the subject of USP, once we've got everything set up the way we like it, I'm going to put this back up. I am ready to now start setting up my cameras. The camera, its setup, its location, its settings, everything is going to be dependent on your USP. So depending on what you're trying to show and how you want to show it, that is going to change your camera settings. So let's say, for example, in this particular house, I know that the arches are a unique feature that we want to show that off. We also want to show off this courtyard. We like this sweeping curve that we've got going over here, and this window. So I know that this is the shot I want it to have. Now, standing over here is going to be a different experience than it is standing back here. So really you're going to need to think about, okay, well, what's the best shot for me? Is it a one-point perspective like this with a single vanishing point looking down the guts of it here, which lines up the arches and really shows that off and balances it all out? Or is it about looking through the arches to the kids playing on the other side, picking up that sweeping curve and getting the reflection off the sky this way? Really, it's going to depend on what it is that you want to show. This also changes the viewer's perspective as well. It might be wise to put your camera here because then it looks like we're kind of walking through the garden on the way into the house, and maybe we're in the position of guests coming over to visit the owners. I don't know. Whatever it is that you want to show, that should be helping you figure out where you want to put your camera and how you want to set it up. So I'm going to go for this shot back here, and let's say that this is where I'm ready. So I'm going to hit 3 on my keyboard to just slow down my move a little bit so I can just finesse it and get it exactly where I want. I want a little bit of this column back here. I want to make sure my eye height is correct, which I think it is. Cool, a little bit further over. Great. I want that center line of this wall here, the kitchen island, to be the center of my shot, and it feels like it is, pulling the eye in nicely. Lighting is looking okay, but maybe I need to boost it up a bit now. 15, yeah, good. And R for ray trace. Okay, yeah, happy with the shot, happy with the position of the backdrop HDRI. It looks like maybe there's a park across the street. Lighting's looking good, reflections are good, materials are good. I'm happy with it. Okay, so I'm ready to set up my shot now. What I'm going to do is come down to media, down the bottom here, and I'm going to click on the plus icon, and that is going to save a new image here for me. When I have image 4 selected, or in your case, probably image 1 if you haven't done one before, every time I have it selected, I'm now editing the settings of just that image. So if I were to leave that one there, but then move over, so let's turn R off, and I'm going to move my camera over and make that second one that I talked about before, plus for a new one. I now have 2 different images ready to go. However, when I'm clicked on this, I can change the settings of just that image. So for example, if I want to change the lighting of just that image to be darker like we looked at before, set that to 1, R for ray trace, turn that on. Then I'm going to hover back over the image here and hit the refresh button so that it updates that image. And we'll see now if I toggle between the two, R for ray trace, we can see that's a brighter lighting. Then if we swap back over to here, we can see that is a darker lighting because it has saved the intensity that I put in there. So if I have a look, intensity is 15 on this one, but this other image I've updated to only have 1. So now that we are working on specific images, you can update the settings and then click refresh, and it will allow you to save the settings in just that image. So for example, if I've got 3 different shots here, I've got one shot looking down the barrel there, I've got another exterior shot with completely different lighting setup, and then I've got an interior shot with different lighting setup again. So this is where you start to fine tune your settings specific to what you want to show in your image. So this image here, for example, I've got a bit of an overcast day, someone reading a book inside, sitting there reading, having breakfast, whatever it might be. That's one shot. The next shot, completely different experience. So this might be a summer day this time. We've got afternoon sun coming through these beautiful arches, showing off the USP of that feature. Another bit of USP is the fact that I can see in 2 spaces at once. So if I've got a kid in the pool, I can sit here reading a book and watch over them, make sure they're okay. But I can also see over the other side. So maybe another kid is over here playing in the grass, reading a book, or partner is over there and we've got line of sight with each other. That is a USP feature of this house. So I've tried to show that through this image by placing the camera where it's going to pick up on that. And that's really what you're trying to do as well. You're trying to align the camera in such a way that it's picking up on the USP features of the house, not just in terms of the camera composition, but also in terms of the settings you apply to that camera. So you'll notice how instead of my backdrop HDRI in this shot, which if I turn this back on here, that's what it would look like. Quite overcast, a bit grey. When I was doing it, didn't really make as much sense for a kid to be out here celebrating by the pool. Yep, kids will go in the pool any weather, but for the case of showing off the USP, it's going to look better during the sunshine. So I've changed that back over to a sky dome. I've got noon clear, which is going to give us a nice bright sun. And I've set the intensity down a little bit so that it works for this specific shot, making sure that I can see very, very clearly this light coming through into this space and resting on here. They've got good light on them and there's a nice balance. And I've even got those interior lights on inside there as well. And so that is how you set up your shots. All of the settings that we've looked at previously, you can now fine tune them specifically to each one of these images. And when you do that, you just hit on the refresh button that will update it inside there, save all of those settings for you. And then if you need to, you can quit media mode, move around, do whatever you need to do, make a new shot, or jump back into the other shot that you've got there. Another thing you can do inside of your image selection is, I've definitely got that selected, we can see that, is I can actually go ahead and turn off some of the items that we've got here. So for example, if I wanted to turn off all of the lights in the space over there so that it's not as bright, I could go ahead and turn them off, which I've done here. So let's do the opposite now. I'll go ahead and grab all of these lights in here. and I'm going to turn them on. Then I'm going to hit escape. I'm then going to go to my refresh button, and that will then update it so that from now on, all the lights are going to be on in this image. So if I toggle over to here and then toggle back into this shot, we'll see that the lights are now on in this shot. Same thing if I want to turn all of these off, or if there's anything in the scene graph, doesn't matter if it's lights, doesn't matter if it's kids playing or trees or anything. If you don't want it to be in one of the shots, but you do in another, this is how you do it. You just come over to here, toggle it off, refresh, and it will be off now. So if I jump over to here in my other image, you see lights are still on in this one. All of my spotlights are still on inside there. But if I jump back over to here, they're all turned off. So not only can you change the image settings in terms of your setup, you can also change what is visible inside the image, which means you can control more of the narrative of what's at play. So if you want to play around with the story of kids playing by the pool in one image, but in another image they may be building sandcastles in the front yard or whatever, and you don't want them to be overlapping, you could turn half of the assets on in one image and turn the other half on in the other image. And all you got to do is turn them on or off and update the image that you've got there. Very easy, straightforward. Now for your interior shots, what you need to do is particularly finesse the lighting and your materials. We're typically going to be much closer to the materials than we would be taking an exterior shot. So you need to make sure that you've got a good selection of materials. I would say that these materials that came through as your default Twinmotion materials, probably not as good a quality as we need. So I might upgrade these to Megascan surfaces so that they look a lot better up close. For example, if I come into here, change that to wooden floor, and then change the scale of that 50, we would see that this actually looks a lot more realistic. Now I still need to change the color and all of that sort of stuff, but if we compare the difference, the ceiling has still got the old one on there. The resolution is much better, particularly up close. We can now see the grain, we can see the knots in the timber, and it is much better at collecting the shadow and the light in the spaces. So keep that in mind as well for your interior. You may need to update the materials once we get closer to them. So they might look fine from further away in a shot like this, no worries. But once we get closer to do our interiors, we might need to spend a little bit more time finessing the materials, making sure they look appropriate. Likewise, the lighting that we've got out here, as discussed before, probably works okay, looks nice and balanced. But once we're inside the interior, we're going to have to finesse it once again. So I'm going to have to turn this lighting down a little bit so that each individual light is a little bit lower, and therefore it's not going to look so burnt out. We're going to have a bit more balance in the lighting and some better midtones rather than so much brightness all the way around. So when you're ready to take your shot, you just want to triple check that everything is working to best showcase your USP. So if your USP is about connecting between the exterior spaces and the interior spaces and having good family time, pool, garden, all that sort of stuff like this shot here, then this is a good image for that. Whatever your house is about, you need to make sure your image and your camera selection is appropriate for that. Once we've fine-tuned our camera position and the lighting to get it looking the way we want, we've got a few more things we can play with in the actual camera settings themselves over here. So we can play with the depth of field. So at the moment, we don't have depth of field enabled. I could turn this on. What that's going to do is allow me to choose a focal point. So at the moment, its focal point is up close, and then we'll notice that it gets blurrier as it gets further away. So if I turn that back off, we'll see that absolutely everything is crisp. Turn it on, we get blurrier as we get further away. So this might be particularly useful for you if you've got people kind of semi out of the shot, but you can still see their faces and you're not really happy with it. You might use a depth of field to focus on just an area in the foreground and help you to blur it out as you get further away. If you don't want to have the automatic whatever's closest as your focus, you can click on this pick focus button and it will allow you to choose something else. So I might choose this column over here, and we'll notice that this is now blurrier, and the focal range where it gets crisper is a little bit further down in the middle ground. If I pick focus again, I can pick something down the back, and that's going to choose all the way back down the back there. That will be nice and focused, and everything else out here is going to be blurry. So it's up to you. You can choose what you want your focus to be on. You can then change the aperture as well. So if I throw this all the way up to 10, we'll notice that it won't have as much effect as if I put this down to 1. So 1 is going to mean there's lots of blur for the things that are further away from the focal point. 10 is going to balance it out. So in between that, you can decide how much blur you want the further away objects to be. Don't worry too much about the bokeh shape for now. You can leave that as is. Inside camera effects, we've got a few things like vignetting. So if I drag this up, I can make it darker around the edges, get rid of it. It can be no darkness. You might just want to have a little bit of vignetting to your shot. Lens flare is playing with things like the sun. Parallelism is just going to lock your verticals to be vertical. Near clipping, don't worry too much about that. We can leave that off. And then a few more options up here with your FX. You can control your contrast. So if I wanted to really amplify the contrast of this, I could pull that up a bit. I kind of like it where it was, so I'll pull that back down to 50. Saturation I can play with here if I want to super saturate that and turn it up a bit and make it really bright and warm. Be very careful with this though. Obviously we've got a Simpsons child over there, not exactly what we're looking for, so I'll get rid of that. Most of the time you would actually desaturate. So you play around with having maybe a black and white or maybe a very, very slight saturation. Sometimes you would use this if you're in a garden and the garden is just looking too vivid, bright green, doesn't look very realistic. You can tone it down a little bit in there. For me, I'll leave this as is at 50. You can add some color gradients, some filters over the top as well. Your image options allow you to choose the size of the render. So typically when I'm doing my first couple, I'll just leave that as screen size. So 1080p, that's just normal HD screen. Then I would change that up to, for my final shot, either a 4K or an 8K. 8K is going to take you a really long time to render out depending on your machine. 4K is probably going to be perfectly fine to fit nicely on your A3 sheet. So I'd say 4K is probably best for all of us. Tiled rendering you could do if your computer's struggling, which allows you to just render out one bit at a time. Otherwise, those settings should be fine as is. And then the final thing we can look at is changing our R for ray tracing. So it's actually called path tracing inside Twinmotion. I just call it R for ray tracing so you can remember the keyboard function, but it's a path tracer what we're doing, not actually ray tracing. So already before I was using low settings, purely because it takes so long to load if I put it on high. So if I chuck it on high now for you, we'll see that this is my loading. That is taking a little bit of time to be able to get that out. Now, of course, the lighting, the shadows, everything, the reflections are going to be looking much better, but it will take a long time to do that. So the only time I would set this up to high is when I'm ready to take my shot. So if I'm ready to export this out, looking good, happy with it, I would then change that up to high, come over to here and click on refresh, and then I would go ahead and export out from there. One thing to remember though, if you do take a test shot and you put it on high, moving around is going to really take a long time. So you can either hit R for ray tracing your keyboard to turn it off, or you can just come back and turn this back down to low so that you can test things quickly and see what it's roughly going to look like before putting it back on high. I think I'm going to turn the depth of field off before I export my shot. So I'm going to go back to my camera and turn depth of field off and render, make sure that's still on high. Come over to here to load the settings and refresh that. Cool. Happy with that. I am ready to now take my image and export it. So we come over to export and we're going to hit the plus icon next to image. So we go plus, and then I choose the one I want. I make sure these are selected, so that allows me to, if I am using the path tracer, it will actually path trace it out for you and look the way you want it to. Once we've done that, we can click out of that and we can choose the file type we want. PNG is perfectly fine for us. So then all we need to do is scroll down to the bottom and hit start export. Choose where you want that to go. I'm happy with that. And it will take probably a long time for you to export out. I'd say the first time you go through this, leave your path tracing settings to low or just off. You might not want to put your path tracer on the first time, depending on how fast your computer is and whether it can handle it. If not, just adjust your settings so that it still looks good without the path tracer on. So first couple of times you will have a go either low settings or no path tracer, and then after that you will finesse it, get it looking the way you want it to, cameras in the right position, depth of field setup, all of those bits and pieces. And then when you're ready to go, you can put it back up to high and see how it looks. Let's take a look at that shot and see how it came out. So here are our shots. I've done some tests already. So image 2 was the one we just sent out. Let's double click on that. And here we go. Okay. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, to be honest. I like the way the sun is going out here. It's not a full bright sun, which I'm okay with. Maybe these columns, now that I've rendered it out at full resolution, need a bit more grunge to them. They're looking a little bit flat. And I might want to turn the lights back on so we get a bit of light down the corridor. So what I'll do is I'll jump back into Twinmotion. I'm going to quit media mode so that I'm not impacting what I'm doing there. For ray trace, turn that off for a second. T for our material. And then what I'm going to do is just turn the grunge up a little bit. See how that looks. Cool. That's a bit more grunge. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker as well. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, just take the shine off it a little bit. It's probably a little too glossy. And then we'll come back into this shot. I'm going to turn some of those lights on. So we'll try just getting all the spotlights first. Turn them on. What about the IESs as well? Turn them on. 1, 2, 3. Doesn't impact, that's just over the table. So I don't need them on, I don't need the table to be that bright. Let's have a look. Yeah. I think that's looking better. So we've got a bit of brightness coming in. Might be too much over the top of that table still. Yeah, it's that one there. Let's just turn that one off. See how we're looking. Where's the other ones? Maybe it's that one. A bit too much brightness. Yeah, it was that one over the top of the table. That's calmed it down a little bit now. That's better. Good. So this is really the process. You're just going to keep finessing and improving. I like that little wrap of light coming around the corner now. It's balanced it out a bit better. That table's not too bright. And we've got a bit more grunge to these columns. Maybe I'll make them darker again. Maybe they just need to be black. T to grab our material. And let's have a look. It's when the ray tracing, the path tracer comes on, it changes what it looks like on the screen. So let's just try that. Path trace. Yeah, already I'm happy with that. All right, so that's enough for me. I'll turn that back on. Then I'm just going to update these settings here to refresh that, make sure that's all in there. Click on our image. We've got path tracer on high, so we're ready to export. All of our settings are still there. Export, and it should already be in there for us, the same image. We haven't changed it. If we need to change it, we can just click on the number, but it should be there ready for us to go. So we can just click on start export, select folder, same folder as last time, and we'll just let that render out. I'll go ahead and skip through this and we'll have a look at how our images come out. Yeah, better already. I like the way that light's coming around the corner. I like the columns. Lighting is looking pretty good out there. Materials. Now that I'm looking at this, those bricks aren't right. We should have a full brick on this one and then 2 halves. Otherwise it's kind of looking like brick tile. This isn't brick tile, and we're way too close to the camera to just let that go. And yeah, now that I'm looking, we've got these funny little half bricks in the corner as well. Okay, so we've got to change that, and then I might put on some depth of field just to blur that corner a little bit more now that I've got the lighting back on. So what I'm going to do is just jump out of media mode, T for this material, and then I'm going to go over my details tab and just stretch this a little bit. So what happens if I go up to 1? Not quite right, or maybe I need to also move it over a little bit. Yeah, okay, that's better. And then 1's probably too much, so let's try 0.8. And I'll move that over again. Oh, no, that was fine. Actually, let's move that so that it gets in the corner of that seat there. And then, how's that looking? Yeah, we're just off it. So let's go 0.77. See how that's doing it. It's just a little bit too small. We can see these two here creeping in there. So what I'll do is I'll just go up to 0.84. See how that goes if I offset that. Great. Okay, so I'm much happier with this now. I can see solid brick, 2 half bricks, solid brick, 2 half bricks. And it's fixed the corner over here as well. That's looking much better. I don't have those weird little half bricks. And I've neatened out this edge too. So we've got our mortar line sitting right there as it should. It's looking pretty good over here. Okay, that's the kind of tweaking of materials that you want to be doing when you're up close. It does really make a difference. What was the other thing? I am changing my field of view. Okay, so my camera settings, I'm going to turn my field of view back on, my depth of field. And let's just see how that's looking now. Yeah, pretty happy with that actually. Can change the focal length as well, by the way, which is going to change the width of your camera lens. So if you want it to be a super wide angle, you can pull that out. Just be very careful with this. So obviously that's going to stretch a lot depending on what you do with your shot there. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Material's looking better. Lighting sneaking around the corner. I'm not going to see what that depth looks like properly until I take the render. So I'm just going to go over refresh, put all those settings in there, go over to export, and let's just go ahead and export it. Once again, I will just skip through this, show you the finished product. All right, let's have a look. Number 2, the next one is this one here. Okay, cool. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking now. I could probably fine tune my depth of field a bit more so there's not quite so much blur. So I'd maybe turn it down a little bit so that not only is the column in there, but I've also got this bit, because really all I'm trying to do is just blur that light around the corner so it doesn't look as fake and flat. But other than that, I'm pretty happy. The material looks much better now. That's a much more realistic brick. Corners of that are looking good. Light's looking good here. Like the way it's catching around. I'm pretty happy with this shot. So that is your process for rendering out. Once you've got to a stage where you're happy with the lighting, the materials, landscape, everything's looking good, you're showing off your USP features by your camera's position, you've then readjusted all of those elements and you've done your back and forth. Beyond that, it's really a matter of taking a bunch of renders and just trial and erroring until you finesse the different details. You'll get used to looking at the shot and pinpointing things that aren't quite working. Because you've been looking at it so much in Twinmotion, you find that it's really beneficial to just render it out, even if you feel like it's not 100%. Render it out so you can look at it as the final version. Then in your own mind, mark it up just like I was doing just then and say, okay, I need to fix this, this, and this. Go back into Twinmotion, do another render, mark it up again, another render, mark it up again. And then through that process, you'll refine this until you're happy with the end product, just like we've done here. So that is your process for Twinmotion, and that is what we're looking for your 3 renders, your 2 exteriors, your 1 interior. Or if you've got a particularly interior focused house, consult with your tutor. They might recommend that you do 2 interiors and 1 exterior instead. This really is what we're looking for. How can you best show off the house you've been studying to best express and represent the USP, the unique selling proposition, the key features of that particular space. So that is all for your 2 videos on Twinmotion. What I want you to do now is just have a go, get stuck in. Everything that you've learned so far will continue to impact one another. So the more you delve into your lighting, you might have to come back and fix your materials up, the assets now that you've placed them. When you take your shot for your perspective and export it out, you might think, actually not happy with those assets, I need to shift them around. So they are all going to impact each other, particularly the lighting, of course, is going to impact everything. So I want you to think very carefully about your USP, about what you want to express. Start to think about the story that you're trying to tell. Who lives there? Who do you want to live there? What are you trying to show off? What are you trying to tell through your project? And as always, have fun. That is really what we're looking for. We want you to dive deep into your project and really express what you think is the best parts of it so that you can show off a full client presentation, not only with your drawing set, but a really strong set of client perspectives as well. So for now, have fun, get stuck into Twinmotion and enjoy it.